safety and criminal justice. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councillor Ed Flynn and Councillor Frank Baker. I want to remind you that this is a public hearing being recorded and broadcasted on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed on the City of Boston website. Please silence your phones and other devices. We will take public testimony at the end of the hearing. If you'd like to sign up, we have sign-up sheets over to my left. Please state your name and affiliation and residence, and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that everybody has a chance to give their comments. And you can also submit written testimony by mail or email to the City of Boston webpage. Today's hearing, we have various public safety grants. Actually, we've also been joined by City Council President Andrea Campbell and Alexander as well. So we've got everybody here. Several public safety grants. First, we'll do the Boston police grants. We have grant docket number 0666, which is a strange way to start off the day. Message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $850,000 in the form of a grant for upgrading, expanding, and integrating technology and protocols related to the anti-terrorism, anti-crime, anti-gang, and emergency response awarded by the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety, administered by the Boston Police Department. Docket number 1151, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $3,253,000 and $317 in the form of a grant for FY19. This grant was awarded by the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to be administered by the Boston Police Department. The grant will fund the costs associated with providing enhanced 9/11 public safety answering point services. We have docket number 1152. It's a message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $472,063 in the form of a grant for FY18 State 911 Training Grant awarded by the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to be administered by the Boston Police Department. This grant will fund training and certification of enhanced 9/11 telecommunications staff. Docket number 1386, $417,809 in the form of a grant for the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, known as JAG, awarded by the United States Department of Justice, administered by the Boston Police Department. This grant will fund 4 domestic violence advocates. Fire. And then we'll skip down to docket number 1668, $275,000 in the form of a grant for the Cease Boston, awarded by the donor group to be administered by the Boston Police Department. This grant will fund Cities Empowered Against Sexual Exploitation, or CEASE, network in Boston, a multi-sector strategy among law enforcement, businesses, faith community, legislators, and survivors who are working in partnership to abolish the demand for human trafficking. So first we have the Boston Police Department. So if you could introduce yourself, and we'll go right through. We'll start out with docket number 0666.
Good afternoon. Happy holidays, councilors. David Carabin. I serve as the Assistant Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Intelligence and Analysis at Boston Police Department and the Director of the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. This funding in particular is a expansion on some development that we've been doing within the Boston Regional Intelligence Center to enhance some of our analytic capabilities. As you know, we're responsible for analyzing vast amounts of law enforcement data to help provide direction to our officers on the street and in the surrounding communities. What we are doing with this funding is helping to create a consolidated platform that helps improve the efficiencies of our analytic workflows. We've already invested quite a bit of money into this so far, so this money here is going to help us improve upon that a little bit and then pay for maintenance fees and a couple of additional expansions. Anecdotally, we've already seen some major improvements in the amount of time that it is taking our analysts to process a lot of data, identify connections between individuals that otherwise wouldn't have been noticed. And primarily what we're finding is in providing analytic and investigative case support, the analysts are able to cull through vast amounts of data and notice connections at a time speed that is much greater than what they had in past times and past experiences. So in a nutshell, that is what this is looking to go towards. There's a lot of data processing that's going on in the background, but up front there are some visual analytic tools that are really helping to improve the analyst workflows.
Thank you very much, David. You've been in front of us several times. This is a repeat grant, but I always ask the question for the people who are watching. Can you just explain a little bit, just really the Monarch notes of what the brick does and how we utilize the brick to continue to make Boston the safest major city in the nation?
Sure. So the Boston Regional Intelligence Center consists of approximately 60 individuals, both sworn and civilian, and we focus on providing intelligence, which is not necessarily secrets. Instead, it's information that's been collected and analyzed in order to improve public safety decision-making. So depending on the different types of priorities that are put in front of us by city representatives such as yourself and the police commissioner, as well as the chiefs in the surrounding jurisdiction, we focus our attention on violent crime, property crime, and terrorism as matters of significant public safety concerns throughout the region. And we have personnel that focus on doing their best to understand patterns and trends of criminal activity, any indications of pre-operational planning of terrorist activity, and help prepare our men and women that are out in the streets across various public safety disciplines. A lot of this is done through data analysis, and so tools such as this help them to look at data in a more smart way, more intelligently, and essentially put people in the right places at the right times to improve public safety.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. That's it for me. Councilor Ed Flynn?
I don't have any questions. Council McCarthy.
Thank you very much. Councilor Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David, any of this money for cameras?
No. No, sir.
Okay. So just all in, visual analytic tools.
Sure.
Can you explain to me what that is?
So think about it this way. If some of the traditional ways of running searches, so typically what ends up happening is there's an individual that's under investigation, and so we'll be asked to identify an individual's criminal background, to look into their other criminal connections to see if there's some type of an organizational structure at times. What that typically requires is looking at police reports that are written by our men and women on the streets. It usually involves a combination of running queries through structured data systems, but also reading a lot of reports. So what this does is there's a lot of data processing in the background so that when you run a query on an individual or some type of a subject, instead of just showing up as strict text, it actually will show link diagrams that show connections between people. So it could show how a phone number and an address and other individuals are connected to folks, and it can actually go 8 points of separation out. So what we're finding already through this project is that things that would have required a high attention to detail, just reading and reviewing and taking notes, are showing up pretty much on a computer screen in a visual manner that's a little bit easier to understand.
Okay, and who's monitoring this? Is this Boston Police are monitoring
Correct.
it?
Correct. Police department.
Our own brick people are managing
Yes,
it?
sir. Yes, sir. And it's not necessarily monitoring. It's more with the right criminal predicate according to policies and procedures, going in, doing advanced research and analysis.
Okay. And analysis from police reports, but also video analysis. Do you do that
So
also? Is it all cross-referenced?
So actually, there's no video analytics involved in this whatsoever. This is strictly data analysis outside of the video and photography and things of that nature.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Madam President?
Thank you, Council McCarthy, and thank you, David and the BRIC, for what you do. And this will probably be a conversation that has to continue separate from this hearing.
Of course.
Obviously, we've been following, whether it's concerns from the ACLU or other organizations, and concerns from particular populations of folks in the community around the data that you do have to gather, gather to keep us safe. And so the question is, how transparent can you be with respect to the criteria and the information that you gather without sort of violating, I don't know, existing laws and policies you have internally?
Sure. So to start, I believe when I testified back in the spring, I went through a lot of the protocol that and the laws and the policies, everything from local all the way to the federal level. We are required to operate under very strict laws, a lot of guidance materials and things of that nature. So, I mean, simply put, we don't start an analytic process such as what I've described without what we call criminal predicate or reasonable suspicion that there's a crime that's taking place. So that as kind of the starting point for anything we do. We don't go on fishing expeditions. We don't, I mean, the rule of law in our Constitution really is at the heart of everything that we do. Contrary to some beliefs, there is no bias based on ethnicity or religion or place of birth or a lot of those different factors. We view things like that as just descriptors, as attributes to some of the data that we may come in contact with. It's never used as a starting point or rationale for anything related to law enforcement, to be honest.
So respectfully, I'm going to push back just a little bit. And why I say that, whether it's actual examples from folks in the community that I represent coming forward and saying, I was picked up or stopped because I fit a description, even though no criminal activity whatsoever, right?
Sure.
Or I was sort of caught up in a ring of activity, but I happened to live in that community but was not participating in activity that the police was interested in. So I do think at some point, whether it's you, the BRIC, and it doesn't have to be in this space, I think it's better if it's not in this space, there's a serious disconnect, I think, between what folks on the ground perceive as bias and then the policies and practices you guys have to do your jobs, right?
Of course.
And so how do we make sure that that disconnect that may exist between certain communities, frankly, goes away? And I think the only way we do that, obviously, is communicating with one another. It's not going to be easy conversations or easy conversations to navigate, but I do think there's an opportunity for folks to know more about the BRIC and what we get to see when we go and tour.
Sure.
And the work that you go do, frankly, and to know more about the work that you guys do in keeping us safe.
Of course.
While at the same time creating a space where folks can articulate examples where policy was not adhered to in some way, and as a result, there was an outcome for a family that wasn't a good one.
Sure.
So look forward to continuing those conversations outside of this hearing context. But appreciate the work that you guys do in the BRIC. Know it's necessary work. And we'll keep advocating, of course, for you guys to get the resources that you so desperately need.
Thank you, ma'am.
All set? So
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy.
Oh, you got it. So David, I think you're off the hook. If you want to hang around for the rest of this exciting day, you certainly can.
I think I'll go back to work.
You will go back to work. All right, thank you, David.
All right, thank you all.
Pleasure to see you. So we're going to go on to docket number 1151, $3,253,017 in the form of a grant for the police department. So, anyway, Deputy?
Hi, Winifred Carter. I'm a Deputy Superintendent. I'm the Commander of the Operations Division. And that grant is a PSAP Support Incentive Grant. PSAP stands for Public Safety Answering Point for the State 911 Department, and it provides funding specifically for the city's 911 call center and emergency communications. This year, funds will be utilized by the BPD, the Boston Police, Boston Fire, and EMS to defray costs associated with maintenance and/or upgrades of the computer-aided dispatch systems, which is our CAD, a computer-based system intended to increase the efficiency and accuracy of public safety call handling and dispatching. Funds will also be used to cover several fire and EMS maintenance fees associated with 911 operations, so of which include maintenance and serving of the NICE 911 recorder system. Additionally, funds will also be utilized to defray the costs of salary for enhanced 911 telecommunicator personnel, including enhanced 911 telecommunications, who are emergency communications dispatchers or supervisors.
It's pretty straightforward. We've done this grant a couple times before. I have no questions. Council Flynn?
I have no questions, Council McCarthy.
I'm good.
Council Baker? We're good on that one. All right. Moving right along. Docket number 1152, $472,063 in the form of a grant, FY18 State 911 Training Grant, awarded to the police through the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security.
Okay, and the purpose of this grant is to provide training fees, materials, and training for the Boston Police Department, Boston Fire, and Boston EMS. The grant will provide overtime for training participants as well as overtime for replacement costs. Each department is required to attend training that they have been previously designated at approved Ssfety training courses. The approved training courses are relative to the following subjects: communication courses, products and software, enhancing 911, administrative, and public safety communications.
I have no questions. Council Flynn?
I have no questions.
Council Baker? All right. We're good. Docket number 1386, $417,809 in the form of a grant, Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, which is JAG program, awarded by the U.S. Department of Justice, administered by the Police Department. The fund will fund 4 domestic violence advocates.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Maria Cheevers. I work for the Boston Police Department as the Director of Research and Development. I have allergies, so my voice is very weak right now. But I live in 140 M Street, South Boston. I'm a resident. Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay. So the grant is called the BJA Edward Byrne Justice Memorial Grant, and it's for 2017. The City of Boston has been receiving these funds since 2006. The main goal of the funding is to reduce crime across the City of Boston, employ data-driven, collaborative, community-oriented approaches to crime prevention, intervention, and enforcement, and move the department forward in the area of information sharing and technology. The funds that are used for this grant include 4 domestic violence positions. 3 of those are advocates, and 1 of them is a data analyst that looks at the data and helps us understand where we should be deploying resources and other factors. The other position is a separate position, and that is used to help the City of Boston move from the record management system that we have right now, which is an Intergraph system, over to Mark 43, which is a brand new record management system that will be going online, I think, in November of next year. There's training coordination that is involved in that, and there's interfacing with the contractors to also set that process up. But basically, it's a full-time IT position that's been funded off of this grant for several years now. With regard to the domestic violence advocates, in 2016 alone, there were 18,359 domestic violence calls for service in the city. Our civilian domestic violence advocates reside in police stations, and they work with all victims, whether the victim wants to move forward to file a restraining order or press charges, or whether the victim doesn't want to take that route. We still work with victims to try to get them involved with some safety planning and other resources and support that they may need, just depending on where they want to go with the particular call for service and incident. We have several domestic violence advocates throughout the city. It just so happens that this grant covers 3 of them. It also covers the domestic violence data analyst who serves the whole city of Boston, including the domestic violence advocates that do not work on this particular grant. Again, each year, the amount of money that we get from this grant depends on our crime rate. So every year, we report UCR crime data. By 2021, we'll be reporting NIBRs, and I can talk to you about that in a separate meeting, but it's the difference between reporting hierarchy crime and reporting all crime, and that's going to happen in a couple of years. But right now, based on our UCR crime data, it depends on the amount of money that we get from this grant, because it's actually a formula grant, not a competitive grant. I think that's it. Does anybody have any other questions about the grant program?
I do.
I do.
So 18,000, I'm doing a little quick math here, 18,000, and you have 3, so the 4 domestic violence advocates is in addition to another team, or they are?
There's 3 of them that are covered here, and then
Okay.
we have about 5 more covered with other grant funds, and they're placed in area districts. So we clearly need probably twice as many, to be honest with you. But right now, we're trying to get a domestic violence advocate to work out of each district, depending on the calls for service that come into that district. At this point, we do have some domestic violence advocates that split their time between 2 districts. But the way in which we deploy these domestic violence advocates really does depend on the number of calls for service that go into any given district. And what happens is they receive a referral on their desk from the officer, and what they'll do is they'll follow up on the referral.
So if there's 18,000, how many, just ballpark, would actually move forward with an advocate?
Probably ballpark, oftentimes less than 30%. But they will receive materials. So even if they're not ready at that point, they do receive information.
Okay, so let's say there's a domestic violence call. Just walk me through the steps of,
Yep.
you know, Frank and I are Boston police officers, domestic violence. We knock on the door, we separate the couple, whatever the situation may
Yep.
be. Do we have, how do we proceed with letting them know that we have these people
So-
who can help them?
That interaction will not happen at that call for service. At that call for service, what will happen is oftentimes they'll decide on whether or not an arrest is going to be made. Most of the time when they go to call for service, the perpetrator or the assumed perpetrator has already left. And then the woman needs to decide whether or not she's going to file charges formally and whether or not she's going to also need an emergency restraining order and then a follow-up longer-term restraining order. She's then given instructions on how to get the emergency order, which is only 10 days. And then during that 10-day period, the person who's being accused of domestic violence has to show up at the court and answer to that call. When that person shows up, the judge then decides whether or not to issue a longer-term restraining order. In the background, you have this domestic violence advocate and you have a DV detective. Now, with the DV detective follows up on the case if the woman or the victim decides that she's going to move forward with the case. If she decides she's not going to move forward with the case, you have an advocate that says, that's okay, we're going to meet you where you are right now, and we're going to try to work with you where you are. And in situations like that, oftentimes they'll try to meet them for coffee at a safe space, and they'll give them information on how to do safety planning, what you need to start setting aside to do safety planning, you know, thoughts about opening up a separate account, where can you go, where can you hide documents, safety documents, and things like that. So oftentimes, because so many women decide not to move forward on a formal criminal case, what will happen is that at least that they will get the information that they need from the advocate to put themselves in a safer space as they move forward.
Okay, my last question would be like a success rate. How do you measure the success of that section of the department?
Well, we do it numerically, but we also do it through anecdotal stories. So oftentimes when we rewrite our grants year after year, we'll ask a couple of DV advocates to send us a success story, and they'll send us a couple of paragraphs on specific incidents where they helped victims in situations that made them much safer. You know, whether it be a different place to live, moving forward on restraining order, moving forward on a case, again, safety planning. And oftentimes, even if a woman decides that she doesn't want to move forward again, she'll continue to do outreach to this DV advocate. So she may not be in a place right away where she's ready, but she could call them 4 months later and say, you know what, this is getting insane. I am in danger. How can you help me? So the introduction may be made beginning with a call for service, but that relationship continues on and on with many of these victims.
All right, thank you very much. Councilor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Council McCarthy. Just as a point of reference, myself and Council President Campbell filed a hearing order on domestic violence, and we'll probably have the hearing sometime over the next several months. Last week, I had an opportunity to visit a domestic violence center in the South End and learned a lot about the issue. I also learned that it's a huge problem in immigrant communities. Are you also doing outreach in various languages other than English?
So we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have this grant, and then we have about 2 or 3 other grants. So it's sort of a patchwork of a bunch of different grants that come together so that we can support all the different domestic violence advocates in the different districts. So many of our advocates speak speak Spanish as their primary language, English as their secondary language. I believe we have somebody who also speaks Haitian Creole. And so we do go out of our way, depending on what district that they're going to be placed in, to find an advocate that speaks the language that is represented in those neighborhoods. And we also have partnerships out of the Family Justice Center with a number of other service providers, that if we can't get somebody on call right away, we can call our partners in the Family Justice Center who have a number of other advocates that can be called in to help us do translation, as well as translation services within the BPD.
Yeah, thank you. As we prepare for the hearing, would it be possible to arrange a meeting with you and try to get a little bit more of information on exactly what your office does and some of the research that you compile that could help us out during this hearing?
Definitely.
Okay.
We can help.
I also represent the South End, and I know there's been some domestic violence issues relating to LGBTQ.
Yep.
Could you give a little bit of background on some of those issues?
Yeah, well, statistically, the level of domestic violence in the LGBTQ community is consistent with the level of domestic violence in other populations. Just as, demographics and ethnic background is also pretty consistent. So, I think we have these ideas that, certain cultures participate in domestic violence more than other cultures, and in fact, that's not true. The percentages of, white, European background batterers are very consistent to the percentage of batterers in other cultures, as well as in the LGBT community. I know I keep on messing that one up, but there are some programs that often we partner with that can reach out to folks in that community and to really help them with their unique needs in terms of being victims and survivors of that particular situation. And we also do training with Boston Police in the academy around domestic violence extensively and how it impacts different populations.
When I was a probation officer for 10 years, when a judge would order someone into a domestic violence program, oftentimes it was difficult to actually get a program and also be eligible to participate in the program due to insurance issues.
Right.
It was expensive. Is there any way that we could look down the road in terms of helping people get into these programs, even if they don't have the funds or the money to get into them?
Well, I'd first like to say that the evidence on the efficacy of these programs is weak. So the programs are not that effective. So I'm not sure that insurance is going to be the answer to that. What they do know research-wise is that the younger you can get a person into a program, the more effective it is. So say you have a teen dating violence situation in the schools, and you realize that young teenagers are involved in battering their girlfriends or other women or other people in their lives, that's when the interaction or the intervention should take place. So, if we were to sort of invest in prevention funding around the batterers, it should be really targeted to a much younger population, as early as, high school, young men, and because that's where it's effective. When you start moving into older age groups of men, batterers intervention statistically and evidence-based just doesn't work as well. Very small percentage.
Do they offer any of these programs in the Boston Public Schools in terms of maybe not domestic violence, but ways that these issues could develop and what your strategy could be?
So on another issue, more around the sex trafficking work, which we'll talk about in a little while, that we are looking into working with the Boston Public Schools, and we are in the middle of conversations with the Boston Public Schools around curriculum, around healthy relations and healthy development, which really is a prevention mechanism to prevent all kinds of abuse against women, whether it be, buying sex, participating in porn at a young age, domestic violence, crimes against children, all that violence in a continuum we are hoping to address by introducing curriculum early on around healthy relations and healthy dynamics. And so right now I don't have an answer to that question. I know we are beginning conversations on that with Boston Public Schools.
No, thank you for taking my questions.
Yep, all the time.
Thank you. Council Baker?
Hi, Maria, how are you?
Hi, good.
Good, just a quick question. So the 4 positions we currently have now, this is just how we fund them every year with this grant?
Yes.
Okay.
One of those positions is the data position. The other 3 are DV advocates.
Our advocates. And how many advocates do we have citywide?
I'm going to send you something
Okay.
after this is over. At the top of my head, I believe we still have 8.
Okay, and you have one more grant in front of us that we're going to talk about?
Yes.
After. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council President?
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank you, Maria, and your team for what you do. 8 doesn't seem like enough, but
It's not. We need.
So what's the gap?
We need 11. We'd like to have 1 in every district. Some districts obviously have higher numbers in terms of calls for service than others, and we could figure that out based on what the need is, but it would be nice, ideally, to have 11, so that every single district gets coverage. I mean, we're actually sharing one in East Boston, which is insane.
And are all these positions funded through external grants, meaning are any funded through the City of Boston's budget?
I believe we have 1 on the City of Boston budget. Lisa, can you answer that? Yeah. We don't have any on the budget yet? Okay.
So JAG and,
And VAWA.
so,
That was just recent, that's why.
do
It
we
was just
know,
this past year.
Lisa, you can come, do we know how much, what that line item is in our budget for that advocate?
You're going to have to come down, Lisa.
Like, Lisa, you look great, come on down. Thank you.
Come on down.
Thank you, Lisa.
We had a grant earlier that we lost, where two of the domestic violence advocates sat, and one we were able to fund through the operating budget, and the other one we put on the JAG grant.
And do we know how much that one is in the operating budget?
Not off
Okay.
the top of my head,
No
but I
problem.
can get that for you.
Because I think the question is, then how do we make up for the gap in the operating budget for these positions that are so vital, obviously, to the work and the calls that the officers are getting? So you can email, you don't have to have this on the top of your head, but that I think is something.
69,000. I have a little helper here.
Thank you. Well, through the chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice, I think that's something that we should be talking about advocating for, if it's not going to come through grants or if we're losing money through some of these grants for these vital positions.
We are.
Yep.
We're currently running out of deficit on this grant.
Okay.
And VAWA is up in the air as
And
we,
VAWA is up in the air as we
right
speak.
now at the federal level.
Well, I'd love to continue the conversation about how we can advocate for BPD. I mean, we've been talking all day about the needs for BPD, but how we can frankly realize some of those in the next budget cycle. Very helpful. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you. All right, we'll move right on to docket number 1668, $275,000 in the form of a grant for the Cease Boston, awarded by the donor group and be administered by the Boston Police Department.
The group is a foundation called the MegaDay Foundation, and for the past 4 years, the Boston Police Department, City of Boston, has been designated as a CEASE community. There are 14 CEASE communities in the country, including San Diego, Seattle. Oh God, there's so many. We've got a couple in Texas, Houston, some in Florida, but the 14 sites were chosen because of our desire to impact sex trafficking by trying to reduce demand, which means that we're not going after victims who are in the life, who are in prostitution. We're trying to impact the buyer side of the markets with the idea that the less buying there is, the less the market will have a need for recruiting more and more people into prostitution and sex trafficking. And so for 4 years, we've pretty successfully delivered to our initial funding source many different components around reducing demand. We've approached it on a social media front. We've approached it through law enforcement by going after buyers. We've approached it by partnering with the faith community. We've approached it by also partnering with the private sector. 23 businesses, major corporations in the Boston area have signed on a pledge to work with their employees to get them to stop buying sex online while they're in work and to do zero tolerance programming for this. The initial funder was an organization called Demand Abolition, and they were located in Cambridge. They decided to switch tracks, and they moved on to DC, and right now they're lobbying. They're using a lot of their resources to do lobbying of members of the House and the Senate around this demand reduction work. MegaDay was involved with us from the beginning, so when the funding source for the first foundation sort of dissipated, MegaDay stepped forth and said, okay, what do you need to continue this work? We're really interested, involved, and we like what Boston's done so far. So we applied for this money, and we've just received it recently, and we're going to continue our efforts with the faith community. We have about 30 faith leaders that are showing up once every 3 meetings, doing major strategic planning with them on how they can impact change through their congregations, whether it be through youth programs or men's groups in other ways from the pulpit, through just community education and prevention. We're going to continue working with the 23 business leaders in the Boston area because they're interested now, and now that we've done human resource policies, what else can we do to impact change in this area? We're going to continue training not only internally BPD, law enforcement agencies, on how to do reverse stings and other law enforcement-focused efforts, but we've already trained about 15 other to 25 other organizations, law enforcement partners, to do the same work around sort of approaching this through using technology, because you really can't approach it through just arresting the buyers, because there's at least 9,000 men seeking sex online every day in Boston, and we don't even have close to 9,000 police officers. So you really do have to approach the law enforcement piece through a social media lens. And, you know, so these are 4 different components that they're going to support financially over the next 3 years. And hopefully, as time goes on, all of those sectors, which is the business sector, the faith sector, the law enforcement sector, and the city of Boston, can come together and do a broader campaign called the Red Light Campaign that we want to replicate from Ireland moving forward in the next couple of years. So that's what this grant is about. Any questions?
I had one comment. Are you actively getting the colleges and universities, maybe any type of PSA announcements to colleges to inform them of, you know, what some of their
So we're
helpful tips for students would be?
Yeah, not yet, but we are hiring a full-time coordinator. The position, once this grant is approved, we will be moving forward on posting a full-time position to lead the CEAS effort. And one of those components, or one of the work tasks that they'll be tasked with, is to interface with the up to 43 universities and colleges in the Boston area, and reaching out to their wellness folks and thinking about ways to sort of get that public education campaign and messaging out there, because that is the population that starts buying sex when they're in college. It's usually the first time that they're introduced to sort of purchasing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Baker?
I just want to thank you for the work. You've been helpful to me when I first took over. I had a major problem along Dorchester Ave. We're ahead of it, but it's you know, like you said, 9,000 people a day. So that is that 9,000 online?
That's just online. That has nothing to do with
Wow.
what's going on in the massage parlors or what's happening on the street level. And so it's a major problem that can't be impacted, obviously, by law enforcement alone. That's why this grant is going to help us bring all the sectors together and sort of think strategically about how they can impact the problem.
And this grant is $275,000 over 3 years?
Yep.
So it's
Yeah,
not very much money.
It's not. It gives us money to hire a full-time coordinator, because right now, we're all kind of just working our full-time jobs and doing this
Right.
work. But the full-time coordinator will allow us to also hire a couple of consultants that can lead the effort. So we can get somebody that can just do the law enforcement piece on contract, small contract. But these are experts in the field that have done it a million times already. So it's not like they have to spend a lot of time catching up. So there's going to be a couple of consultants that are going to lead, some of the major consultants, and there's going to be one full-time position. And then there's some other money that will allow us to continue our online work. Because when you do the online work, you have to buy ads from Google.
Yeah.
You have to do these Facebook campaigns, and they cost money. They don't cost a lot, but they do cost money.
So who does the online work? Do we have officers monitoring
Yep.
online?
So the way that it is you buy fake ads. Should I even be saying this?
Probably not.
So there's just, we can talk offline.
No, but we have
Yes.
uniformed officers that are
So it would be
monitoring.
detectives. It would be
Detectives.
detectives from the human trafficking unit. And
Who took over for, drawing a blank on her name?
John is still there.
Donna's still there?
Yeah,
Okay.
Donna's still-
Okay.
yep, yep.
Okay, I thought she moved
No.
moved on.
Yeah, she's still in place. And
Okay.
Yep.
Tell her I said hi.
I will.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
We don't want to give any secrets away, even though I know that only my dad and Mrs.
I'm like,
O'Malley
wait
are
a
watching.
minute.
My father
I want those Johns knowing.
Council President?
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and hello to your dad. No, Maria, thank you for the work you do, whether it's this work or domestic violence work. It's all important work, more resources, more resources. We also had, frankly, to give kudos to C11, some issues in the Codman Square area, and new captain over there and Sergeant Dunford responded quickly in such a way that the residents felt the impact and are seeing less activity in the Codman Square area. So thank you to you and the department, and we'll keep advocating for more resources for you guys with respect to this work.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no further questions for the Boston Police. I think you guys are all set. We're going to move on to the Boston Fire Department as well as the Mayor's Office of Homeland Security. Have a great day.
Thank you.
We're just going to go to a quick recess. We're going to start with docket number 1495, $172,427 in the form of a grant for FFY 2017 Assistance to Firefighters Regional Grant awarded by the Federal Emergency Agency and administered by the Fire Department.
1495, I have 9. 1495, I have 966.
Yeah, so
Okay, you keep going.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay,
let her rip.
okay.
Hi,
I'm
Kathleen.
Kathleen Judge,
Yep.
Deputy Commissioner for Boston Fire. So thank you for having me this afternoon. So we're actually very excited about this grant. It's a grant that we got from the Assistance for Firefighters, so through FEMA. It's regional tech rescue support. So there's a big program in Texas called TEACS. So what we've done is invited some of our sister towns, so Everett, Cambridge, Somerville, Chelsea, to join us and fund for them their tech rescue, because we do provide a lot of regional tech rescue. So this was exciting that we could have other cities and towns join us, primarily in the TEACS program, but there's other tech rescue programs across the country that we can participate in.
That's great. What would a tech rescue be, Kathleen?
There's various stages of tech rescue. So there's rope, which includes rappelling. There's tunnel, there's trench. There's various, issues with dangling, from a high rise or from a crane. So all of those very aspects of tech rescue are covered in these programs.
Thank you. Council Flynn?
I have no questions. Thank you, though.
Council Baker?
And you answered mine with the tech rescue. Thank
Okay.
you.
There you go. Council President?
Thank you and the entire fire department for what you do.
Thank you.
Nice, easy one. Docket number 1496, $172,427 in the form of a grant, assistance to firefighters regional grant awarded by FEMA, administrated by the fire department. This grant will fund the growing need for the fire department personnel trained tech rescue in cities and towns, Boston. So this is an addition to 1495, I believe?
No, this is 1496 is what I just described. So if you may, I can go back to 1495, which is also from the AFG.
Okay, roger that. Okay, so yeah, that was 1496, this is 1495. Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
That also came to us from the AFG, and this is was funding in particular to our radio system. So as you all know, the only way we communicate on the fire ground is through our radios. Our radios are supported by Motorola, but our parts are no longer supported by them. So we requested some funding to replace our radios. In addition to replacing our radios, we also requested that we have the capability to go to another bandwidth on those radios. As you also may also be aware of, in 2021, our megahertz level, which is around 470 to 480, is going to be discontinued. And since we rely very heavily on our radios, we need to have the ability to change out our radios and go to a different level bandwidth. We're hoping to go to either 700 or 800 megahertz. These radios that AFG has supported will help us get to that new level of the megahertz that's required, as well as giving us state-of-the-art radios that will have parts that can be replaced.
Okay. Is the Motorola still up in Braintree or Quincy?
I'm not sure of their location, Councilor.
Okay. Yeah, my old days in the Parks Department, that's where we used to have to go to get them fixed. Council Flynn?
Thank you, Council McCarthy. Does the fire department have the ability during an emergency through their radio to communicate with the police and EMS?
Yes.
And how does that work?
It's just different channels that are added to the radio so that they know whether they have to talk to the Coast Guard or police or EMS. It's all through the various channels that they work together on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Council Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so during 9/11, those radios still work?
Correct.
Okay.
That's absolutely right.
And the megahertz just gives us a more efficient radio. What is?
If we go, because we'll be losing the megahertz in that bandwidth of the 400 to 500 range, we need to go to another range that will support, in the future, some personal accountability technology on the radios. So the best thing to do is go to the higher megahertz, which you'd also get better clarification, voice clarification, you'd hear better, and they can actually have the radio talk through the mask, so they don't have to take off their mask to talk on the radio. So you
Okay.
need to do that at a higher megahertz level.
Oh, okay. So this is a better system for us.
Absolutely.
And this grant helps us pay for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council President? All set?
Okay.
All right, we'll go on to docket number 1583, $237,500 in the form of a grant, FY19 State Hazmat Grant, awarded by the Massachusetts Department of Fire Services to be administrated by the Hazmat Response Team through the Boston Fire Department.
Yes, this is similar to our state training grant that we get for Moon Island and all the training that we do there. This is specific to hazmat. So this helps the hazmat team train in hazmat incidents. It helps them buy the props and supplies that they need, so decon tents and things like that, that are paid for off this grant.
Okay. Does this have anything to do with any money for the physical plant on Moon Island?
Not this particular money, because the Hazmat operation is actually located in Alston on Holton Street,
Oh, okay.
and so they do the training there. They can go to the island to do training should they need to, but the state training grant covers any cost on the island, including any of the overtime that's required for back to basics or O2X or functional skills tests.
Okay, thank you. Council Flynn?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Council Baker?
I'm good, thank you.
okay, thank you.
All right. Looks like we're moving right along to docket number 1662, $14 million in the form of a grant to continue to support unique planning exercises, training, and operational needs that will assist in building enhanced and sustainable security capabilities to help prevent, respond, and to recover from threats, active terrorism, including chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive incidents, awarded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, passed through the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to be administered by the Mayor's Office of Homeland Security. This grant will fund urban area security initiatives in FY18.
Hi, good afternoon.
It'll come on. Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Anderson. I am the Deputy Director down at the Office of Emergency Management. So Boston and the 8 surrounding communities comprise the Metro Boston Homeland Security region. So it's Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Chelsea, Everett, Quincy, Revere, Somerville, and Winthrop. And we've all been awarded this $14 million as part of the Urban Area Security Initiative Grant, or the UASI program. You hear the word UASI around. Talked about the purpose already, but we work with the regional partners to allocate the funds using a risk-based methodology, and the projects funded focus on 8 specific mission areas. Safety and security gets about $1.3 million, critical infrastructure protection about $2.2 million, intel and info sharing $2.4 million, interoperable communications $2.3 million, SBIRNI, that's the mouthful, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive detection $1.4 million. What we call medical surge, $559,000. Planning community preparedness, $2.9 million. Cybersecurity is new this year, and it's about $348,000, and about $649,000 for program administration. Any questions?
I do. So the cybersecurity is new. What exactly does that entail? Is that hacking into our system, or?
So cybersecurity, actually DHS is required this year that we have a cybersecurity project. We're doing a couple of things. We're doing some 2-factor authentication in the city of Revere. Believe it or not, some jurisdictions still use Kaspersky software, so we're doing some Kaspersky mitigation. That's the Russian, right? We're doing some cybersecurity infrastructure hardening, about $50,000 of that, based on recommendations of a cybersecurity liaison we've hired. So the liaison's working with all the communities to help them identify their vulnerabilities and make recommendations on what kind of hardware and software and training we need.
Thank you, Nancy. Council Flynn?
Yeah, I'm interested in what type of communication you have with the U.S. military. Are they active with your training and ongoing procedures that you do? Are they helping train?
Not really. I don't know, were you familiar with the Vigilant Guard exercise that just took place?
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I think only the Boston Fire Department had any role in that, and they worked on an exercise down at the Joint Base on Cape Cod. But we don't typically work a lot with U.S. military.
The only reason I ask is we have the U.S. Coast Guard has a major presence in Boston. The U.S. Navy has a major presence in Boston, right in the ocean, obviously, in the North End and in Charlestown. I would be interested in knowing what type of interaction they would have with the Boston Fire, Boston Police, State Police.
So last year, remember Sail Boston, last summer, June 17? We worked with them and established an emergency operations center over at Dry Dock. So we worked extensively with Coast Guard then, and National Guard, police, fire, FEMA, everyone was involved, all the stakeholders. But typically, this grant doesn't do a lot, we don't do a lot to interact with military.
Okay. Thank you for taking my questions.
Council Baker?
Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning.
So we have $14 million to split with 8 other, however many other communities?
Yeah.
Okay, and they have to all fit with it, so that 1.6 or whatever it was for the security plan, we would get 1/8 of that, or?
No, actually, a lot of the projects are regional. So someone had asked a question earlier about cameras, right? Purchasing cameras from the police.
That's right where I was going with this. That was me.
So we spent about, this grant includes, I think, about $980,000 for the critical infrastructure monitoring system. We call it SIMS, and that's a regional
So
system.
that would be bridges and rails and?
No, these are the region's cameras. It's not bridges and rails. It's not the T cameras.
Oh, so when you say infrastructure, you mean the camera infrastructure?
Camera infrastructure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, the MBTA has their own cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
police have their own
these are
cameras.
regional cameras?
these
so-
are regional. They all tie in regionally.
And so who operates them? Who, like?
The individual jurisdictions. So we buy things, the dispatch consoles, we buy the maintenance on the systems. You're familiar with Lantel, company
Yeah.
Lantel? So Lantel actually does the maintenance on the system.
So this isn't necessarily all Boston cameras. Everything needs to be, so I'm envisioning near what's connecting Boston and Quincy or Boston to Somerville. So those areas, am I right?
That's correct. So there's, actually, the city of Boston do it.
Yeah.
Right, we have a program to really enhance the connectivity through BONET. I don't want to get too technical here, but that's a system where all the communities are connected through nodes, and we're doing some additional fiber enhancements to improve those connections.
Okay, so where will there be actual new camera plans enacted with this money here?
You know, it's hard to say. When a camera needs to be replaced, that's a new
That would
camera.
fall into this?
Yeah, we don't really have a plan going out to establish new camera locations. We have been tending more recently to buy deployable cameras, so that if it turns out there's an event at, say, the Common,
So you put it
we
on
can
a-
put it where we need it, right?
Yeah,
And they are tied into the system.
So are we having, and this may be a little off the grant, are we having discussions about new camera plans or areas that we should have cameras in?
Not that I'm aware of. I can look into it and see if there's more information on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know I have discussions on cameras constantly
Yeah.
with development and trying to tie them on to our cameras that we operate in the city, the police cameras, whether they're brick cameras or whatever the cameras we have, so, okay, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Madam President?
I have no questions at this time, Nancy. Well, I guess just one is, just given, first of all, thank you for what you and the department do. Just curious, given all that's happening in Washington DC, the impact that's having on funding and resources to your division.
So interesting, there is, in our grant guidance, the set of instructions that DHS makes us follow in order to get this money. They do have an earmark. They say we have to give 25% of the money has to go toward law enforcement, terrorist prevention activities. And they have indicated that they would like cybersecurity initiatives. They haven't put a percentage on that yet. They may in their next grant cycle. But DHS is definitely taking an interest in cyber. They're also requesting that we include cyber representation in the grant allocation, in the decision-making, that we need to have a representative there, which is all new. You know, our decision-makers tend to be law enforcement and fire.
So there's the potential that with these new categories of defense or what they want folks to do, they could increase the funding to attach to those new initiatives.
Initiatives, yep.
Very helpful. And this money hasn't gone down, this grant here?
Slightly. It went down, I think, 216,000.
Okay.
But that's essentially level funded. We've been essentially level funded since 2010. But, you know, having the same amount of money from 2010, maybe we're not level funded. We're actually decreasing in our capability.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you, Nancy. Okay. Thank you, Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Madam President. That concludes our hearing for today. This hearing has been on docket number 0666, docket 1151, docket 1152, docket 1386, docket 1495, docket 1496, docket number 1583, docket number 1662, and docket number 1668. I look forward to putting this out in the affirmative in the next council meeting. Council hearing is adjourned.